Red and blue lights painted my driveway in chaotic patterns as I watched 17-year-old Brandon Miller getting handcuffed behind his back. The kid was practically screaming, his voice cracking with indignation as he shouted about his rights and how his mother would have their jobs. Meanwhile, I stood calmly beside my pristine yellow Lamborghini Huracan, explaining the events to the lead officer. I had moved into Willowbrook Estates 3 months earlier. My tech consulting business finally allowed me to afford the house and the car of my dreams. Then Karen Miller introduced herself. The HOA president, perfectly styled blonde hair, the warmth of a tax auditor. Her gaze kept drifting to my Lamborghini, and she immediately suggested I park the flashy vehicle in the garage to maintain the neighborhood's aesthetic standards. Her subtle disapproval quickly escalated into a full-scale campaign. Within 2 weeks, I received my first formal warning, citing a vague clause about vehicles that might disturb the community's peaceful atmosphere. I ignored it, but Karen doubled down, sending increasingly aggressive letters about alleged speeding and noise, with fines climbing toward $200. What caught my attention was her son Brandon, who would lurk nearby during my confrontations with Karen. He was tall, with an air of entitlement that made my skin crawl. The situation reached a boiling point when Brandon approached me alone. Strutting up with the confidence of someone who had never faced consequences, he delivered his demand without preamble: hand over the keys to my car. He claimed that since his mother owned the HOA, she technically owned everything, including my vehicle. I laughed out loud at the absurdity. His face turned bright red. He stormed off, but not before screaming that I had no idea what his mother was capable of. That night, around 2:30 in the morning, I was awakened by strange noises coming from my driveway. I immediately checked the security camera feeds I had installed after Karen's harassment began. What I saw made my blood run cold. Brandon was crouched beside my Lamborghini with a crowbar and a screwdriver, clearly attempting to break into the vehicle. His movements were clumsy but determined, and I could already see scratches forming on the door handle. My hands shook as I dialed 911, whispering to the dispatcher about the break-in in progress. I stayed inside, monitoring the situation remotely. Brandon grew increasingly frustrated as my car's sophisticated security system proved too much for his burglary tools. He kept looking toward his dark house, having clearly decided to take matters into his own hands without consulting his mother. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Brandon heard them, but instead of running he doubled down, attacking the car door with renewed desperation. When the first patrol car rounded the corner with its spotlight blazing, Brandon was still standing beside my Lamborghini, caught red-handed in the act of attempted grand theft auto. The veteran officer was completely unimpressed by Brandon's immediate threats about his mother and his insistent shouting that he was merely retrieving family property. Within minutes, the kid was in handcuffs, and I had provided the crystal-clear security footage as evidence. Karen appeared in her robe and slippers just as her son was being loaded into the patrol car. She began shrieking at the officers about false arrest and police harassment. When she realized the magnitude of the evidence, she shifted tactics, hysterically blaming me for entrapping her innocent child by deliberately parking an expensive car in my own driveway. The officers calmly explained that attempted grand theft auto was a felony, regardless of her twisted logic. The charges against Brandon were filed within 48 hours: attempted grand theft auto, criminal mischief, and destruction of property. The scratches on my Huracan would cost over $3,000 to repair, pushing the damage into felony territory. Karen hired an expensive attorney, but the security footage was unambiguous. Her son had been caught on camera attempting to steal my car with burglary tools. The real consequences began piling up quickly. Other neighbors started coming forward with their own stories about Karen's abuse of power. The HOA board called an emergency meeting. Local news picked up the story about the HOA president whose son tried to steal a resident's Lamborghini, and Karen's professional reputation began crumbling as her employer distanced themselves from the scandal. The court date arrived. Brandon was sentenced to 18 months in juvenile detention and ordered to pay full restitution for the damage to my vehicle. When the judge read the sentence, Karen let out a wail that echoed through the courtroom, her face crumpling as she realized her entitled son would be spending the next year and a half behind bars. The HOA board had already voted her out by a margin of 8-1. Her neighbors, once cowering under her tyrannical rule, now spoke openly about her abuse of power. The local newspaper ran a follow-up article titled, "Former HOA President Faces Civil Lawsuit After Son's Arrest," detailing how 3 families were pursuing legal action against Karen for harassment and abuse of her position. Her employer, a prestigious law firm, quietly asked for her resignation. Karen's carefully constructed image of suburban authority had crumbled completely, leaving behind nothing but legal bills and public humiliation. As the bailiff led Brandon away in shackles, Karen turned to glare at me one final time, her eyes filled with the impotent rage of a woman who had finally discovered that real consequences exist far beyond her petty kingdom of mailbox regulations and lawn height requirements.